Hello everyone, it's Daryl. Hope you guys are having a great day. I'm having a good day. I wanted to get up and get started about 9:30, quarter to 10, and now it's actually 12:15, 2.5 hours later than I planned. But today we're going to be working on the 2008 Mercury Mariner, which of course is the same as a Ford Escape and a Mazda Tribute. We're going to be replacing the front CV shafts, half shafts, drive shafts, CV joints, axles, all the different things used to describe the shafts that come out of the transmission and make the wheels turn on the front of a front-wheel drive vehicle. So we purchased them from Rock Auto. Mine have torn rubber boots on them and the grease is starting to leak out. A technically challenging job. It's just heavier, medium to heavy mechanical removal and replacing of some large nuts and bolts and parts that have to be undone. It's not a bad job, really. And I've got a couple tricks I can show you to help save some time. The flat rate manual on this, or online, the flat rate called for an hour and 40 minutes per side. So about 3 hours and 15, 3 hours and 20 minutes for the total job. Open the Rock Auto box and see what's inside. Well, it looks like they got the right parts. I'd say there's a real good chance they're the right parts because they're two different lengths, which is what you would need for this. The new reluctor wheel or tone ring is in place where it should be. They come with a new axle end nut. This one has a different end that slides into the intermediate shaft on the passenger side. And this one has the regular splined end that slides into the transmission on the driver's side. And it looks like this is going to be a straightforward job. Everything looks good. What do you say we get started? First, we're going to jack up the car and support it on stands. If you don't have an impact wrench, a lot of people start by popping out the center cap on the wheel, inserting a breaker bar with a large socket through there, and loosening the axle nut while the wheel's on the ground. That gives you a lot more leverage and keeps the wheels from trying to turn while you're trying to take the axle nut off. If you have an impact wrench, either a big electric one or an air-powered one, that's not an issue because the impact wrench will pull it right off without having to worry about spinning everything around. You know, my impact guns aren't the best in the world, so I decided to go ahead and break these nuts loose the old-fashioned way with the breaker bar and the 32mm socket through that little pop-out center cap I told you about. And I also used a cheater pipe to put over the end of the breaker bar, get more leverage, and push it down, and popped it right off that way. I also had my hand on the end of the cheater pipe when it popped loose, and the vibration of the snap of it cut my palm open. So be careful what you're using for prying and pushing on things, and wear a glove while you're doing it. At least I'm wearing safety glasses. I learned my lesson about that years ago. I always wear safety glasses when I'm working on the car, but sometimes, sadly, I don't wear gloves, which is really stupid because I have a whole box of gloves right here, cut-proof ones too, which would have definitely saved me from getting cut and bleeding. But we're going to put one on now, even though it's kind of too late, but I keep even getting cut worse later, right? So we're going to go ahead and release the axle nuts on both sides before we jack the car up. That'll make life a lot easier. Alright, we're apart now. We took off the 19mm lug nuts, and that exposes the brake and steering and suspension system for the front. And you can see right down here on the CV shaft, the split in the, right there. There you see it, the split in the boot, which eventually will cause the CV joint itself to fail. So we need to get that fixed, before winter. It's been leaking for probably 6 or 7 months. I noticed it when I was doing an oil change. And in order to change that, we're going to replace the axle. I already loosened the stub nut here, the axle nut. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to see about, we might not even take, some people showed removing the ABS sensor There's an 8mm bolt here to remove the ABS sensor. I might do that, I might not. Some people showed taking the caliper off. Some people said you don't have to. What a lot of people did was remove the bracket bolt that bolts all this onto the strut, and then remove the little clip that clips the brake line to the strut. That gives you more stretch room and flex room on these two lines. And then once you've removed the two 18mm bolts that go through and connect the steering knuckle to the strut, the steering knuckle will pivot and swing forward toward you, giving you enough room to push the axle stub inward, swing it to the front of the car, and then remove the whole shaft without taking off the ball joint, the tie rod end, or the brake caliper. So we're gonna start taking some stuff apart in an experimental way here and try and see how well that works. Although I'm looking at the situation with the brake pads on it right now, and it looks like the brake pads are worn down to almost nothing. So I guess the next step is going to be to just not fight it, just go ahead and remove the brake caliper. But it's not quite that simple, because this is a hybrid, and the hybrids have automatic brake operational systems which engage the brakes on a random cycling basis while the car is shut off, the key's not in it, no one's even near it. It'll randomly cycle the brake system. So in order to keep that from happening while the caliper's off, we need either put the brake system in bypass, which involves turning the key off and on several cycles and tapping the brake pedal a few times, or you can just disconnect the negative terminal on the battery, which is what I'm going to do because it's easy and it's right on top. We're just going to pull the terminal off on the battery, and then we'll call it good. Alright, we're going to need a special socket to remove the caliper. It's a 9mm hex. 9mm is not a common size and doesn't come in most kits. So we got that in there. We can either use a regular wrench or maybe the impact wrench to get that off if we have to. This brake line's kind of in the way here. It should come right off. Alright, I got behind the inner end of the CV joint, the axle, and wedged my long pry bar with it's a nice pry bar with a bend on the front. I got that behind the axle between the transmission output area and the end of the axle, and just pushed inward to pry it out this way. And just a little bit of force caused it to move, so let's give it a little pull. Should be pretty close to coming out. Now it's just a matter of grabbing it and pulling it the rest of the way out. And there it is, successfully removed, just slid it right out. And now the opposite is going to be just the case. We're going to slide it back in, all the way in, so it snaps in on the inside edge. And then we're going to maneuver it to fit back into the knuckle on the other end. Pretty straightforward. And I decided to remove the caliper bolts first. And there's two, those 9mm hex. There's a cap over the dust boot right there. You just grab it and squeeze it and pull it out. Another one up on top. There we go. There's the other one. Now we set our wrench to open, and I'm sure we're gonna have to replace these brake pads too. And we've got the set, so we might as well. And their lifetime warranty, which I already have a warranty on them, even though the guy at the desk couldn't find it. That's okay. It'll all work out. Alrighty. These usually aren't on super tight. Oh, just a little pull with the wrench, and it breaks it loose. And you can see, where can we see it? Right there. That's the slide bolt turning and coming loose. And there's no reason to fight with it to get it all the way out right now. We can just get it so it clears the threads, and then gives us room to slide the caliper up and off. And you can see it's not moving out anymore. We'll push it a little bit by hand, see if we can get the slide. There we go. As we push and turn and push and turn, push and turn. Alright, next we're going to do this little 8mm bolt that holds the speed sensor on, the ABS sensor. And be careful with this because it's a tiny 8mm and it's threaded into some steel. It gets really corroded down in there. And if you do it wrong,
or too aggressive with it, you'll snap it off and cause yourself a couple extra hours worth of work when you really don't need to. And in fact, you probably could get this job done without even taking that off at all. But we're going to see if it comes off easy, and we'll take it off just to be safe. Next to the 10mm bolt that holds this bracket down up here under next to the brake hose. And that's just a standard 10mm bolt. Well, the head's a 10mm. And if you did happen to strip this or break this one out, you can just put a different kind of bolt with a nut through it if you had to. It's not a big deal. Alright, now got the brake lines loose and out of the way, or the ABS lines loose and out of the way. Now we're going to undo these two 18mm nut and bolts that hold the strut on to the knuckle. Now we're going to pop off the anti-rattle clip. Screwdriver, take that off. Usually you get new ones with the brake pads, but hang on to them just in case you don't. There's nothing wrong with them, they're reusable. Now we're going to grab the caliper and work it off. It's usually, these escape ones are pretty darn easy to get off. There's really nothing holding them on the back side, and they just got to clear the rustiness on the back of the pads on the other side. And if I had two hands, it'd come right off, I'm sure. Now you can see the caliper came right off pretty easy. I'll pop that inner pad out and have a look at it, and it's definitely down in the replace zone. I figured it would be since the other side was. That's the thing about these hybrids. If these are this low on the front, I wonder what my backs are like, because the back disc brakes wear out way faster than the front disc brakes. And that's just about nothing left there. So we're glad we're doing this brake job now instead of waiting. The piston will compress with a C-clamp just like any other brake piston would. There's no difference on that on the hybrids. I can't find my little hooks I use to hook the brake pads and hang them up from the spring, but never fear, we have a zip tie. And for right now, we just hung it off this retainer clip right here to take the weight off the cord, and we are ready to remove the nut the rest of the way. And oops, you know what, I might have to relocate for now because I forgot to take loose the strut mounts. Shoot. Alright, let's do that now. A couple of partial turns and the DeWalt impact gun got it out the rest of the way with no problem. We drove those strut bolts out the rest of the way. Now we're going to pull the axle nut off the rest of the way with the 32mm. And I say once it's broke loose, the DeWalt makes real easy work of it. Put that up there. Alright. Now we notice we got a second jack here. That's going to be very useful in managing the lower control arm height when we snap it loose from the strut. And that'll help us get everything lined back up nice and easy too at the end. One of the annoying things when you're wrestling with the hub, trying to get the tail threads on the axle out of the steering knuckle, is the rotor keeps flopping around on there. You can prevent that by putting a couple of the lug nuts back on, holding it tight. That'll save you some antagonism while you're working on it for sure. Now, I think I mentioned that the passenger side is a little different than the driver's side because the passenger side connects to an intermediate shaft and the driver's side snaps right into the transaxle. So the driver's side has a ring clip on the end of it and can go in on any of the splines and just snaps into place. The one on the passenger side actually has one set of splines that's, I can see it right there, that's double wide. And you got to line that up with where the double wide spline was on the one you took off. In this case, we can see it's right there on top, right by my finger. And lock position, and just wiggle a little bit as it slides into place. And it should slide right on. Like I say, there wasn't any force required, like snap it off. I just got behind this part here, there's a little part that hangs down with a hammer, just a claw hammer. And I tapped on, actually it wasn't a claw hammer, it was just tiny, like a 2-pound or 3-pound mini sledge. And I just whacked on it a few times until it slid all the way off. And at first I thought, well, I thought there was something wrong with this one, but I wasn't sure. And then I saw the grease and I'm like, yeah, there's got to be something wrong with it. And it's just starting, but I can't even find it right now. But right where my finger is, there's a little tiny tear right there. And that means that probably already most of the grease has left the sealed system in there, and it gets replaced by water and dirt, and before you know it, the cage and the bearings inside start to get dirty, and they crack and they grind, and then eventually it'll snap off and you won't be going anywhere. So good to replace it while we got it apart. You see everything's brand new and nice and clean. I'm going to slide a little bit of grease, just axle grease, in the splines here and over the splines here to make everything slide together nice and easy. And this is going pretty well. I've been at it an hour now and taking my time, not trying to hurry too much. So you could do this job in an hour and a half with no problem your first time, I'm sure. The half shaft is pushed back securely into location. The knuckle has been swung up and over the stub end of the axle, and the nut has been preliminarily tightened. I've cleaned up all the slides on the brake hardware, and I've compressed the piston using the big C-clamp. Now we've already reattached the ABS cable. Actually, we didn't even need to disconnect the ABS cable on this side. We put one strut bolt in for a holder. We're going to reattach the 10mm bolt that holds the ABS stabilizer bracket to the strut. There we go. Alright, everything else looks like it's back in place. While you're under here, you're going to want to check in your stabilizer links, make sure they're not rattly. If you have the situation where your escape is making a lot of noise, like a big clunking, rattling sound when you go over a pothole or bump, it's almost always these stabilizer links, and they're very inexpensive and super easy to change. So I would highly recommend changing those out. They're about 25 bucks a pair, and you can change them yourself, which is very little bit of effort, and it eliminates the clunking noise you get when you go over a bump or railroad track or pothole. When you're doing this here with the axle shafts and disassembling the strut and knuckle, you really don't need to get an alignment afterwards, because there's no adjustable alignment components in this. There's no upper camber adjustment on this. There's the only adjustment on these is the tie rod end. So this is really a simple deal on the alignment on these. Although here there is some sort of fine tuning they can make by rotating the top mount on the strut if it's a little bit off on the camber on the top of the wheel. But honestly, if it was fine before you did this and you took this apart and put it all back together, it's going to be fine when you get done, because there's no play in these two bolts here. These two bolts that go in really tight. There's no wobble or play up and down, back and forth in them. So there's really nothing that can be thrown out of adjustment by doing this repair. Alright, now we're going to reset the brake pads in here, put the slide bolts in after we lubed them with some brake lube, and tighten those down. Finish putting, we might have to use that secondary jack to line up the hole for the bottom here. I haven't checked yet. I just put the one in there to hold it in place while I was lining everything else up. Well, we got it back together. We haven't final torqued the lug nuts yet, but we let it down off the jack. Now we're going to torque the axle nut, and it says to torque it to 220 foot-pounds. So let's see what we can do here.